Hi everyone, Josh Foreman here, and today my plan is to make amends because what I've found over the past several years from feedback through various places such as my Patreon and Discord and the comments below, the last class that I did on eyeballs was insufficient. Let's put it that way. There were two major problems. First of which is that I've given these classes live in person many times, but with a live class, there's always that interpersonal dynamic where you see what the student is doing and you could give advice and correction as you go, and there's that nice kind of iterative feedback loop that doesn't happen with a video. And this was my first time making a video tutorial, and so I was not wise in the ways of how to set up my cameras, do the editing properly, and all these kind of things that would really help facilitate, just seeing a tutorial online. So I can correct that today. I can also correct another big problem with that video, which was just the low-res, grainy camera, bad camera angles and stuff like that. Thanks primarily to my Patreons, who over the years have provided enough of a little side revenue stream that I could, justify things like buying two nice cameras, and so I can set those up in ways that can see the art, light them properly, etc., etc. So I'm really excited to bring this little interstitial addendum to the eye video. So this is meant to take place, after you've watched class 2 and before you watch class 3. Yeah, so let's just dive right into it. Oh, real quick, just thank you again to my Patreons who made this possible. And thank you to people who have come and given me that feedback, especially on my Discord. That's becoming a really fun place to hang out, talk to people about art and crafting, and get advice from lots of different perspectives. So, okay, now let's get into it. So first of all, reference. Always have reference with you. Now, I'm going to do a slight modification / correction to the way I showed you guys last time. I am going to be doing a slightly longer ocular cavity, you may call it, because I want to make sure that the front part of the, this hole basically, and the back part are far enough distance in this axis going back towards the back of the head. And I think I was kind of steering you wrong a little bit by making it as small as I did. Well, I could just show you a difference here. So on the piece that I was actually doing in that video, the eye ended up fairly shallow, and so the face is a more flattish face. And when I was redoing it for other instructional purposes, you can see how the brow ridge and the cheekbone go back further on the head there. And that just gives it, I don't know if it's more realistic, but more standard to what I'm used to, at least. Yeah, so I'm pulling this line back a bit more. And hopefully you just watched that video and you haven't started doing your head yet. And so you haven't made that terrifying mistake. No, it's not that big a deal, honestly. It's not, doesn't make that big a difference, but I'm just gonna say in general, let's pull the eyes back. Remember, there's, about one eye of distance between the eyes. Of course, this is not the size of the eye. This is the size, right? You can see the distance from one corner of the eye to the other corner of the eye there. That's different than from the holes that we're digging right now, which need to have the eyes and all the muscles around them. And the other slight modification that I'm going to recommend is, I'm surprised I didn't do that because I normally show this in my classes, but when you have your face, blocked in and you're going to start with the eyes, just make a quick placeholder nose. Does not have to be fancy at all, but this will just help you as you're creating the eyes to not be distracted by how weird looking a noseless face is, and just have that off to the side and you can pop it on and off as you need. The reason we don't sculpt the nose first is because it's harder to get your tool down in there to get all the details with the nose there. So I'm just going to leave that off. Do the same thing that we did in our last class. Just kind of smooth it down by palpating around the hole there. Okay, and trying to make sure we're staying symmetrical. It's helpful to use, you know, the same finger on each hand at the same time. If you can pull that off, it's helpful to do. Okay, let's get some eyeballs in there. Flatten that guy down a little bit. Like before, I'm going to show you the bead method and a clay method, but rather than tear the bead out, I'm just going to show you just all the way through, because I really do now recommend that beginners start with the bead, and I'll get into why later. So I'm just going to do the clay for one eyeball. You can see this is already not very symmetrical. The distance there is a little off. Out. And I'm gonna grab, let's see, here's a bead here. Now I should note this other method that's way faster, which is just to use a googly eye. Okay, so I'm just gonna put my blob there. I'm gonna put my bead over here. Actually, before I put my bead there, I'm gonna make a quick note. Most of these little cheap beads that you get at a craft store are going to have this pearlescent coat on them that flakes off, and when you stick your clay to it the first time and then move your clay around, it's going to pull off these little flakes. So do yourself a favor and just scrape them off before you use it. Yay, now I have glittery pants. All right, and in the last lesson, we talked about making, the placement, making sure that it's far enough back from the bridge of the nose. And here's where having a nose also helps, so that when you look at your reference, you can actually see, okay, from this part of the eye to the bridge of the nose is approximately the same distance there. Now, when I'm using a bead like this, I'm gonna do a little bit of backfilling, just to keep it stable. So same thing as before, you make your snakes. Okay, so here's what the bead is super useful for beginners to help them understand what they need to know. And that is that the eyelids, when you use your tool and you're pressing the eyelids down, press perpendicular, is that the word? I don't know. Towards the ball of the eye. So to demonstrate, my tool is always angled so that I'm pressing downward toward the ball. And when I'm here, I'm pressing that way. You want this lid to always be following the contour of the ball underneath. That is just one of the most important things right now. Don't worry at all about the shape of the eye, where the eye is poking through the eyelids, because you're just gonna cut that away. Right now, just pay attention to the angle of your tool. And try to get a uniform thickness of the clay around the eyeball as well. All right, and you'll have all this kind of grunge around there. Usually you can just kind of smooth it into the rest of the face around you, around the eye. Okay, and now you can start worrying about the actual shape of the eyelid. Again, refer to the last lesson when it comes to expressions and where eyelid needs to be for the expression that you're trying to create. Now in this case, the top eyelid here, I can't get it down as low as I want it without making it very thin. So I'm just going to use this little scrap. And again, as I'm pressing it, I'm just thinking about how I'm pressing towards the eyeball. I'm not worried at all about this line. You just need to worry about one line at a time. Okay. And let's see, the corner of the eye, I want to bring down a little bit lower. And because I'm using a bead, I'm not worried about smushing the clay in there as I'm shaping the eyelids. That's why it's fantastic kind of training wheels for beginners to get used to the way eyes are shaped. So once you have your basic shape in there, you don't want to get it perfect yet. You just want to get the general gist of what you're going for. And now we're going to add the soft tissue that's around the eyelids. So we basically created this part and this part. Now we need to add the tissue that's around the top there and around the cheek there. And notice I'm stopping my snake right about there. Because I'm going to use my tool to blend it up and into the inside of the bridge of the nose there. And then when I've got this excess, and when I trim the excess off, I'm doing it at this angle. Because remember, you've got this plane of the of this arch coming in like so, and the skin there, and so you end up with that kind of triangle that I illustrated in the last class. And now I'm just carefully mushing this snake up into the bottom of the eyelid there. Now, more or less, I'm doing the same thing on the top. Now this is where things get very interesting, because this tissue hangs down and interacts with the upper lid in a really interesting way. Again, notice that I'm kind of making a fish shaped pattern here, right? As the tissue around the eye comes down, I'm cutting this little fishtail triangle there. But now getting back to this bit of tissue above the eye, there's usually a line here, and what happens to a lot of beginners is that they will look at their reference, like good artists do. They'll look at their reference and see a straight-on view and see, okay, I see a line that's kind of like a, you know, an upside-down U there, and they'll just draw that on. And the problem with that is that it doesn't respect what's going on the actual topology here. It's not a flat surface with a line etched in it. It's very curvy. You can see I kind of drew these lines around it to indicate how the volume works. Because what's happening is your upper eyelid is actually tucking up into the flesh there, and then you have this flesh hanging down. That's what we're adding right here, is this hanging down part. And as you open your eye wide, it's compressing more and more and folding up into there. And likewise, let's do another one. When you close your eyes, so here's a closed eye, it's pulling that tight. So here's the brow ridge, you have this going on. And so you're not going to have the same kind of line there. I can show you an example. Let's see, I didn't get a photograph of it, I should have, but I did it on this sculpture right here. You can see she's doing the kind of sleepy bedroom eyes thing, where she's pulling the upper eyelid down, and so there isn't that line at the top. So that's what I am trying to make sure that I'm respecting as I do this. I'm following the curve of this tissue, and notice the angle of my tool as well. I'm trying to make sure that I'm not destroying the upper eyelid and the way it conforms to the shape of the ball, of the eyeball. And then when I'm going in this direction, I'm pushing up and into that crease. Very slightly, I'm not jabbing it in there. But that's how I maintain the proper angles. And now I didn't actually put enough on there. It needs a little more volume. To show you what I'm talking about, look at most of these eyes here. This ridge here, this tissue extends further out than the eyelid. You can see if you were going to do an X-ray, his eyelid would be coming back here, and this tissue would be coming out there. Okay, so once those surrounding muscles are in place, that's when I feel a lot more comfortable to go in and to start detailing and getting the lines more consistent around the lids. See, the upper lid here is a little bit wobbly, that line. So I'm gonna notice the angle of my tool. I'm pushing upward into the lid, and because it's a flat-ish shape, it's flattening that line out, but also conforming to the eyeball. Also, I'm going to show this real quick. This is skipping ahead a little bit. This is something we'll do a lot more in the details section, but I just wanted to show you that you can use a paintbrush to help smooth out little imperfections and wobbles in the clay. It's you don't want to use a very stiff paintbrush. You want to use a softer one and just kind of go over it back and forth with moderate pressure. Now this little section in here, the caruncle, I think is how it's pronounced. This little blob of tissue. Notice that it sticks out from the eye in this direction. So it's on the inside of the eye, but it's poking out towards the surface of the face. And what that does is it pulls the lids on the inside a little more out than they are at the back. So you definitely want to make sure that the lids are coming together back here. So when you look at the profile, you can see there's some distance between the back corner of the eye, but then it doesn't match up on the inside. On the inside, it's a lot closer. I'm still trying to maintain a fairly smooth C-shaped curve from the upper eyebrow to the nose ridge and down to the cheekbone here. That will be broken up a lot as you add the nose and more details and stuff like that. But if you start with this fairly simple shape, it really helps you make sure that you've got your proportions and the general flow of the face better. Okay, and finally, this is not a well-defined brow ridge, so you're going to want to go in with another piece, and this is going to be determined by what you're trying to sculpt. Males tend to have a more pronounced brow ridge, and females have a more roundy, less pronounced. By pronounced, I mean sticking further out over the eye, like it sticks out that way. Whereas with women, it's not quite as much. Of course, everyone's mileage varies, and everyone can be beautiful with whatever brow ridge they have, for the record. Okay, and then once I'm happy with the general eye shape, one thing I like to do, again, depending on the character, I like to go in with the edge of, you don't want to use a super sharp tool. You don't want to use a hobby knife like this. But if you use a kind of a rounded tool and press in just very gently, just under the ridge, you can kind of get an impression of eyelashes that way, because the light is going to fall and leave a little bit of a shadow there. Depending on how subtle you do it, it could end up looking just like age wrinkles, so you want to be careful with this. The cleaner and smoother the line that you do is, the more it's going to give the intended look. Showed you like with this guy, you can see I did that pretty clearly. If I want to do a person in heavy makeup, then sometimes what I'll do is I'll take a very thin snake like that. Tack that on, and so that's kind of how you can do some beauty makeup on your sculpture without even painting it. You can see you get that shadow falling underneath there. Now, since I'm kind of doing a beauty makeup job here, I figure I'll wipe out most of these age lines and just give this a nice makeup to character look. Now, once we get to the point where you're adding a mouth and cheekbones and stuff, that's going to bring a lot more into this. Right now, it's a little odd looking, admittedly, decontextualized. But I don't want to skip ahead too much, you know, because there's a plan. The next thing I'm going to go over is for beginner to intermediate clay eyes. And there's one other kind of huge thing that I want to try to drive home for people who are doing the clay. Now, again, I'm just going to kind of reinforce my eyeball there. Now, the thing that I'm going to harp on over and over and over again, because this is the single thing that I see the most beginners having the most problem with when they're making clay eyes, is that when we're looking at the face, tilting it back, what we're seeing is these are eyeballs, you guys. Don't be gross. Okay, so here's your upper eye brow. It's the top of the head. Now, this upside down U shape needs to be your focus. And so what I see very often is, rather than people sculpting eyeballs, they're sculpting like eye footballs. Now, I'm talking I'm talking United States footballs. And that's not what you want. You need to make sure that you're a fully inflated rest of the world football, what we call soccer balls in the US, a fully inflated ball for that eyeball. So I'm going to keep noting that as I go. Just remember that image. Okay, let's do exactly what we did with the bead. I like to start with the bottom lid because the upper lid, usually you kind of want it coming down over the bottom lid. Again, depending on age and ethnicity and that sort of thing. But also, I'm going to do this. Remember, I'm making this little triangle shape here, so that as these eyelids are converging, I'm keeping this plane right here from the rest of the face. Okay. Now, because this is not a bead, as I'm sculpting the eyelids, they're going to naturally squash the clay in the direction I'm pushing, which is why it's extra important to be pushing up towards it, just like with the bead, always pushing towards the ball. Okay, we're not drawing a line like this. We're making two different angles converge to create that line. Now, the pushing that you're doing, because you're pushing from all angles, usually what that's going to do is end up making the ball want to like squash up and out of the skull. Which means, what I'm usually doing is, after I get the eyelids conforming to the eyeball, I'm taking my tool and I'm rocking it back and forth. I showed this in the last lesson. Just trying to push it back down and reinforce its sphericality. I'm gonna get the landmark of the caruncle in there. Remember, it's usually more towards the bottom half than it can be right in the middle. Just look at reference. You can see it's very different for lots of different people. But here's the middle of this eyeball, and you can see it falls underneath it. If you're going to err on one side or the other, err on making it a little bit lower. Okay, now I am going to try to make these two eyes match, just for the sake of it. Speaking of which, I'm going to touch on this real quickly. You can kind of cheat on symmetry by cutting out a little piece of paper that's the right size for your eyeball. I like to use a hobby knife to just kind of stab it, and you can hold it there, and then you would reverse it to make sure that it's the right size on the other. So that just kind of works as a sanity check for you to make sure it's not completely different. That's one way to do that. Now, as I'm carving this upper eyelid here, I'm trying to be fairly careful to not jam into the eyeball itself, but I know I'm going to be damaging that surface a little bit as I do it. And that's fine. I'm just going to go back in and roll my tool back. Make sure I'm getting that U shape from the corner back there to the corner in here. Look at the angle of my tool. Like that and like that. It's not like this all the way to the edge, because that would deflate it. I need to keep it nice and round. By the way, that upside down U shape that I illustrated here, also the same thing you're going to come into when we get to the mouth. The bulge around the mouth, the corners of the mouths you're going to want to keep pushing in the same way that you're pushing in the sides of the eyes. Okay, now I'm actually purposefully keeping these eyelids thicker than I kept these because I know now I'm doing eyelashes, so I'm just gonna keep them thick and press in my tool along the bottom. Notice what I'm not doing. I'm not doing a line like this where I just like drag into the clay. I'm gently prodding my tool and keeping it mostly perpendicular to the bottom lid there. Okay, and I just have to be a little more careful as I'm defining the lines on both sides because I don't have that nice hard bead surface to rest my tool on. Which is why this is just, you know, a little trickier, more for the intermediate level. Now, if you're doing heavy eyelashes like I am, you want them to be shorter near the inside of the eyelid and longer on the outside. So just to make that very clear, because it's kind of hard to see on such tiny clay. When you're doing beauty makeup, so this is the eye, want it fairly short and then it kind of flares out at the corner. Same with the bottom lid. So that's what I'm trying to do, is keep this part of the lid closer to the eyeball and this part of the lid sticking out further from the eyeball. Again, I'm going to cut it at this angle. And I've got this nice sharp line there that really helps me see exactly where the plane of the forehead is stopping and the plane that is on the lower side of the ridge goes inward. And then I will smooth that out as needed with a tool or a finger or whatever. And what's going to naturally happen as these lines are converging from the brow ridge and the cheekbone here, you're going to get a C shape. You can see that here. A C shape like that. But because I haven't really done the cheekbones on this character yet, it's not as pronounced as it normally would be. Okay, now I'm gonna work my brow ridge a little bit because I'm kind of going female-ish on this character. I figure I might as well, since I've already demonstrated male eyes for you. I'm doing a fairly thin brow ridge. So hey, while I've got you guys here, will you do me a favor and check out the description of this video? You're going to see all the various creative endeavors that I've had going on since I started this series. I've got, you know, like I mentioned, a Patreon and a Discord channel. You know, I wrote a book. We're working on getting the second one out. There's a lot going on, and I'd love for you guys to hop on the Discord and share your progress on the work. I will give you all the critique and praise that I can muster. So I want to do an eyeball in here just real quick, which I will be demonstrating, you know, in the next once I get to the eye, and the, you know, I can't, whatever video that is, probably the details. But for now, I'm just going to do this little trick. I'm going to temporarily move, kind of gently pry the upper eyelid up out of the way. I'm just going to take a pen. Now that displaced a bunch of clay, so I need to kind of push it back down to make it so it's not popping out of its socket. Okay, and now we can go back in and reset it. Okay, so she's no beauty yet, but I'll take her there. You know what, I think I'll just finish this out real quick just so I can have something a little prettier in the thumbnail than this. But there you go. Hopefully all that more detail about how to do an eye is gonna do you guys better, and when I am running into newcomers to the medium who need advice, I can point them to this video as well, and it'll do a better job than the last one. Actually, there was one thing I almost forgot. I wanted to note that a lot of people, beginners, say, hey, I'm doing monsters. I don't need to know about human eye anatomy. I just want to point out that what I've shown you here works for almost all creature types. And the more that your eyes kind of have these rules about how the muscles conform to them and how they're actually round and that sort of thing, the more effective your creatures are going to be. So yeah, just one final little quick tip there I thought you guys might get something out of. Alright, so that'll do it for this one. I apologize that this was such a long video compared to the others, but I also, you know, don't apologize because this was requested. Like, people wanted more in-depth, specifically on the eyes, and it's one of those parts that people just have a lot of trouble with. So hopefully this very in-depth, very long version will help a lot of people. If you find it helpful and want to continue to support me, please subscribe, hit the bell button to be reminded when my new videos come out. Go on Patreon and support me there. Also, if you're just into like art and art process and stuff, you should really check out my backlog of Shadow of the Colossus build videos. So I've been, you know, I finished, there he is back there, that Colossus, like massive project. I filmed the entire thing, and it is the most thorough build video that exists on YouTube, I'm convinced. You know, I shot for hundreds and hundreds of hours, and I don't cut out anything. I fast forward through a lot of it, but I make sure that everything is in there for you, or anyone who's crazy enough to watch through it all. Anyway, just thought I'd point that out in case you guys didn't know. So yeah, I will catch you guys on the next one. If you watched Super Sculpey Class 1 and 2, this is now 2.5, and now you're free to move on to Class 3. Thanks for checking it out, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye. Bye. Bye.